Hello, dorks. Okay, formatting at the top is a little off, but my bad. Okay, so toxicology, definition, right there. Here's a list of important toxins, make sure you know them. PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls. DDT, dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane, everyone's favorite word. PB is lead, Hg is mercury. I didn't put them in here because I didn't feel like writing them, but make sure you do at least a quick Google search of the effects they have on human health. Hint, lead's a neurotoxin. Okay. Here's a case study that you guys need to know about. In Bhopal, India, there was a pesticide company, Union Carbide, that one of their underground storage tanks, look at those expertly drawn explosions, one of their underground storage tanks exploded and leaked a bunch of chemicals into the water and a bunch of gas into the atmosphere. So, it exploded, people ran away, some people drove away. Which one would be worse? I'm going to take a little break right now, give you a couple seconds to come up with your hypothesis. Okay, you guys are all geniuses. That's enough time. Which one was worse? Well, it was a gas in the atmosphere, so running away was by far the worst one. But India, not exactly known for being rich, not a lot of people had cars, so their only choice to get to safety was run. Now, why is that worse? Well, if you're running, are you breathing more? Probably. If the toxic gas is in the atmosphere and you're breathing more, are you going to inhale more of it? Oh, definitely. So, down here we have some statistics. About 4,000 people, it says drowned immediately. Now, they didn't actually drown in water, but the gas that was in the atmosphere from the explosion displaced the oxygen that they could be breathing, so they essentially drowned even though they weren't in water. So 4,000 people immediately, another 8,000 people died within 2 weeks, and 600,000 people ended up sick. So they didn't die, but they had some form of illness. Now here, it's a picture of a pretty gross face barfing, but it wasn't just limited to vomiting. It was, blindness, skin lesions, all kinds of negative, sad stuff. Okay. And then here were some of the illnesses associated with exposure to that gas. Yeah, none of those are good things. Okay. Now, you have a synergistic relationship between toxins. Synergistic means that the effect is greater than the sum of the parts. We have a nice little math problem. We have 2 plus 2 is greater than 4. It shows that synergistic effect where 2 plus 2 should equal 4. But with a synergistic problem, you get 2 plus 2 being greater than 4. And then some common examples of that: mixing alcohols with opiates, fertilizers with insecticides, or smoking with asbestos. Fertilizers and insecticides in particular, since that's the most environmental sciencey one, make sure you know. Fertilizers are used to increase crop yields. Insecticides are used to decrease crop loss from insects. And when you mix both of them, you end up with much higher crop output because both of them are doing their job, but they positive feedback loop off of each other. And then smoking and asbestos, that's a nice human health one. Smoking and asbestos exposure are both vectors for causing lung cancer. But people who are exposed to both had much higher incidence rates of lung cancer than people who are exposed to either separately. Now, the opposite of synergistic is antagonistic, where the overall effect is less than the sum of the parts. So here we have 2 plus 2 is less than 4. A pretty common example of that are antidotes given to people who are poisoned or have venoms injected in them. You have the poison, which has an effect. You have the charcoal, which has an effect. But when you combine them, you end up reducing the effect of the poison, and you don't die. Or people who've been exposed to carbon monoxide, they can be put on a ventilator and have extra oxygen pumped into their blood, which displaces that carbon monoxide. And then barbiturates lower your blood pressure, so if you overdose on that, a good solution is to increase blood pressure. Okay, over here, toxicity. There's your definition. It's the degree that a toxin can cause harm. Now, toxicity is measured on a relative scale. By relative scale, it means there is no absolute. You can't say X number of this will cause this effect. Now, the reason for that is one specific dose doesn't cause the same amount of harm to everything or everyone. There, you have me, obviously a perfect rendition. Look at those gains. And then over here you have tiny little Ethan, admitting that he's a pipsqueak, finally. Actually, if that's Ethan, let's add some hairs. There we go, now that's Ethan. Now, if we're both exposed to, let's say, 6 breaths of a toxic gas, Ethan is more likely to have a negative effect from that because his body mass is much lower. So the same amount of a poison will affect him much more than it will affect me. Plus, I'm invincible. Nothing can affect me. Now, there's this concept, it's called dose makes the poison, where this is what we've mentioned in class before. Too much of anything can kill you. It can have that negative impact. Here we have some professionally drawn spinaches. 1 spinach is great, makes you healthy. Too much spinach can kill you. Now, by too much spinach, it means somewhere between 15 and 20 pounds of spinach in one sitting. So you have to be actively trying for that. But the idea there, the dose makes the poison, is that anything in too high an amount can kill you. And then that's where the LD and ED 50 from that last lesson we did before break comes from. LD is lethal dose, ED is effective dose. Okay, synthetic chemicals, those are human-made. They can end up in nature. This right here is demonstrating, exemplifying water, air, and dirt. Can end up in the ground. And then here, you have a lady holding her baby. Babies come out nice and new, so it's pink. Now, all these little red dots represent pollution, some form of toxin that's gotten into the environment. Now here we have M or A. M would be magnification, biomagnification, and A would be accumulation, bioaccumulation. Now, if we look at the baby, it's a little hard to see, but it has 3 dots of pollution, whereas the adult has many more. Would that be an example of biomagnification or bioaccumulation? Pause for like 2 seconds while you think of that. Okay, great. This is bioaccumulation. The pollution is building up in the mother over time. The baby is born with some by virtue of growing inside the mother, so whatever the mother is exposed to can pass to the baby through the placenta. So even when you're born, you've already got some toxins and pollution inside of you, which sucks, but can't do anything about it. Then through your lifetime, you'll be exposed to more, so it builds up in your body. That's bioaccumulation. Biomagnification is the buildup through food chains. Okay. Now, there are natural toxins. Those are just already in nature, and they can still end up in water, air, ground, and people. Now, delivery vectors. These are ways that pollution gets into your body. There's inhalation. You breathe it in through your body. Not your body, your lungs. What a goof. Dermal absorption. That means you absorb it through your skin. Ingestion. It can be via food or water, and it can be direct or indirect. For instance, if you're eating a piece of corn that's been sprayed with an insecticide that you didn't wash, that would be direct ingestion, whereas indirect would be you're eating a cow, meat from the cow, that ate that contaminated corn. That would be indirect. And then motherhood. That's the example we had over here with that poor baby. Okay. Now, solubility of chemicals. This is how the chemical stays in your body once it's in there. There's fat soluble and water soluble. Water soluble means it dissolves in water, and generally, if you get those in your body, you'll pee them out pretty quickly. Now, you can also sweat them out, but you lose much more water via peeing than you do through sweating. Fat soluble, on the other hand, dissolve in fat cells. They'll either break down and the constituent chemicals will store in fat cells, or they will store directly. Now, fat is used for long-term storage of nutrients, so those fat-soluble ones, once they get in there, they stick around for a long time. And most pesticides and herbicides tend to be fat-soluble. So, that's fun. Okay. Now, some toxins are short term. The example I gave you is arsenic will stay in your body generally for about 72 hours, which 3 days is not that long, while others persist, which means they stick around. They last a long time. Common example is DDT, dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane. Sticks around for about 50 years, 50, but then after that it decomposes down into DDE, which then sticks around for another 15 years. Now, it can last anywhere from 2 years to 20 years, depends if it's exposed to atmosphere or not, but let's put 15. Those chemicals that persist are called persistent organic pollutants, POPs for short, persistent organic pollutants. Fun. Now, determining toxicity is difficult. Why? Because everybody is different. I have a twin brother, and he's still different than me. We have different susceptibilities to toxins. For instance, I'm allergic to edamame. He is not. He's obviously allergic to being awesome, because he sucks and I'm great. Now, some ways that people are different. You have natural tolerance. Right here, you have George Burns. He was a comedian whose career spanned like 93 years. He was old. He smoked between 10 and 15 cigars per day, every day, for over 70 years. And when he died, it wasn't from lung cancer. It was from health complications caused by him falling in a bathtub that he never really recovered from. And then you have people who are genetic freaks like Ozzy Osbourne. He has led a life full of drugs and alcohol, but he hasn't had any really long-term health detriments from that because he has mutations in his genes, several of them. One of them, his body processes and breaks down alcohol that he consumes about 4 times faster than a normal human. So once those toxins are in his body, they don't persist as long as a normal person, which is why he's been able to party so hard for 40 years and still be alive. You have differences in body mass, going back to that example of Ethan and I. Ethan is a tiny little pipsqueak with no gains, and then there's me with all those gains. It'll take more of something to affect me than it will to affect Ethan. And since there is no standard human mass, you can't say this dose is what's toxic to humans. That's why, like we saw in the previous notes, it's usually given as X per kilogram of body mass. Or organ health. You have someone who eats a lot of cholesterol, their heart isn't in good shape. They're more susceptible to toxins that affect hearts. You have someone who's been an alcoholic most of their life, their liver's health is compromised through something like cirrhosis. They're more susceptible to toxins that interact with the liver. Since not everyone is the same, that's one of the reasons why assessing toxicity is so difficult. Also, human testing of toxicity generally is frowned upon, so it's usually done on things like rats. But there are morphological differences between rats and humans, obviously, so there might be tolerance differences between something like rats and humans or dogs and humans, whatever animal they're using for testing. And then, final reason, different body systems have different vulnerabilities. The examples here. Your kidneys are more susceptible to toxins that are dissolved in water because all water you intake ultimately flows through your kidneys. Whereas your lungs are more vulnerable to vapors or aerosols because they're in the air, you breathe it in, your lungs are the main organ that interacts with the air. So, yeah. And then there's a cute turtle who just wants a hug. Give him a hug. He's sad.